Hello everybody, welcome back to Heart Breathings. It is video number 3 of how to plan and write a series, and this is one that I know a lot of you have been looking forward to. So today I am going to talk to you about how do you actually plan out your series? How much do you need to know in advance? How do you get all the details straight? How do you follow story threads and breadcrumbs and keep track of character arcs? And oh my gosh, it feels like a lot to track. Well, I happen to have a lot of experience with this because not only have I written multiple series and have worked in more than 5 series, I have a couple of completed series as well as a series that has over 1 million words in the world. I have been writing one series in particular, my Shadow Demon Saga, for the last 10 years, so I do have a lot of experience and I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, so hopefully you guys will benefit from some of that. So we're just going to dive straight in. If you're interested in learning how to plan out your series, just stay tuned. Okay, so as we dive into this idea of how to actually plan out your series, I think the best way to sort of unravel all of the questions that you might have is to address them head on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present questions that have been asked to me about how to plan it out, and I'm just going to answer them as briefly as I can. I'm a talker, I can't help it, but I hope that this becomes a valuable tool and resource for you as you are planning your own series. Also, keep in mind that if you download this workbook, it is going to walk you through a lot of the process and actually walk you through a lot of the planning for your series. So make sure you grab that from the link down below. So one of the common questions that I get asked is, how do I know if I have enough for a series? One of the first things that you should do is identify what type of series you're writing. So again, the workbook is going to walk you through this, but basically figure out what's the main genre. Are you writing a mystery? Are you writing an urban fantasy? Are you writing a romance series? What's your main genre? Then decide what type of series are you writing. And if you don't understand the differences between types of series, head back to video 1 in this video series. You can review those types, which I also have a review in the workbook for you. So a dynamic series, for example, is the kind that where every book builds upon itself and it's one big story arc. If you think that you're writing a dynamic series, then all you need to think about is, do I have enough plot or enough of a story world here that it is going to take me multiple books to tell the whole story? So for example, if you were writing something similar to The Lord of the Rings, where you know the main story arc or series arc of that book or that series is getting this ring that rules them all to the place where you can destroy it. And is this band of adventurers going to be able to fulfill that story promise of destroying the ring in one single book? Or is it going to take them multiple adventures, multiple books to get to where they need to go? And another thing, if you're thinking about character arc and you think about someone like Frodo, who is the one charged with carrying that ring, is he going to grow into the character that he needs to be in order to destroy the ring in one single book? Is this something you can tell over the course of 100,000 words or 300,000 words if you want to make it a really long book? Or is this something where he's going to have to grow a little bit and face one big bad, and then he's going to have to face another big challenge and another one and another one? You don't have to necessarily know how many books it's going to be right from the start. You just need to know, is this going to take me multiple storylines to get to the final battle? So think about Harry Potter, since most of us are familiar with that. There was no way that you were going to get Harry to Hogwarts and have him grow up enough in skill and maturity and understanding his whole team and his resources and meeting everyone he needs to meet and defeat Voldemort in one single book. There's just too much story there to tell in a single novel. So you would know at that point, even if you don't know how many books it's going to take him to grow up enough and meet the right people and go through enough things and get the right resources together and the right knowledge to defeat Voldemort. You don't know how many books it's going to take you to get there, but you know it's going to be multiple books. Then you can go ahead and start your series plan because yes, you have enough to keep going. When it comes to a standalone or episodic style series, you just need to understand, are there enough characters or enough mysteries for my characters to solve that I can write multiple? So for example, if you're writing a contemporary romance series and you have this one specific couple in mind, if you're thinking about a series and whether or not you have enough content to write a whole series, just think about the relationships that those two characters have. Because if it's romance, you've got a hero and a heroine, or a hero and a hero, or however your couple is mixed. So think about each individual main character and who are their friends, who are their family, who lives in the town with them, what types of experiences do they have, and who do they know? So you might discover through that actually your hero has 12 brothers and sisters, and you really want to make this a family related series where you're going to feature a couple based on this family every single time. Or like my Fairhope series, there are 6 books in that series, and each book features a different couple in a group of high school friends. So think about your story world and whether or not you have enough people and relationships there that interest you and that will interest the reader, that will tie together to make a complete series. Same thing with a mystery series. If you have a main detective or a sleuth of some kind, can you think up enough mysteries that are happening in this town or in this situation that they're going to be able to solve multiple things? If you do, then you have enough for a series. Another question that people ask a lot is, how do I know how many books it's going to take me to tell this story? This is a much more complicated question, and it's one that I don't have a definitive answer for you. One thing I will tell you is trust your intuition, because sometimes with certain types of stories, you're going to just be able to sit down and really map it out. You're going to say, well, there are 6 best friends that I'm telling their stories. So each book is going to be a different friend's story. So I have 6 books, and you're just going to be able to plan it out, and you know that that's the way it's going to be. You also might have a detective series or a small town romance series where it's open-ended, that you might have, you can think of 5 different murders that your detective's going to solve, but you also know that there's the possibility that they're going to solve 20 different mysteries because you have tons of ideas. You don't have to have all the answers right from the start. So if you can think of 3 different mysteries, but you think you're going to like writing this character enough to write multiple, then just plan for those 3 and then let it evolve naturally. With a dynamic series, like I was talking about with, say, The Lord of the Rings, I don't know if Tolkien knew it was going to be a trilogy. He probably did, because I think fantasy authors tend to plan things out a little bit more detail. But really, all you need to do is you need to think about, with a dynamic series, where does my character or group of characters start in the beginning, and what is going to be that overarching series arc. So you're going to need a story arc per book. But with a dynamic series, you also need that overarching series arc. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, go watch video number 2 in the series. I will link it for you down below. So in a dynamic series, you need both of those things. You need that individual story arc, and you need the overarching story arc. And that overarching story arc usually is something that takes place over the course of the entire series. So all you need to think about is, where is my character or group of characters in the beginning? Where do they end up? And then you could create a rough sketch of what moves them forward in each individual book. And like I said, I do have some worksheets that you can use to help you with this, but sometimes you're going to think, well, this will take me 4 books. And you're going to get to book 3 or 4 and realize, oh my gosh, there's 7 or 8 books involved in this, because it is a process sometimes. Sometimes for me, I have been able to very easily say, okay, I can clearly see how this is going to be a trilogy, so I'm going to write 3 books. But with my first series, the Shadow Demon Saga, which used to be called the Peachful High Demon Saga, I thought it was going to be a trilogy when I first started it. I didn't have a lot of experience planning series. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I thought, well, it'll be cool to write a trilogy and then I'll move on to something else. But as I started writing, the story began to grow and I started to understand, okay, this is definitely going to be 6 books. Then by the time I hit book 6 and sort of completed a series arc, I knew that this was really just the beginning of my story world. And so I elongated that series, and now it has grown into 12 books with multiple spin-offs. So I didn't have all of that planned from the start. I didn't know. I was basically just flying by the seat of my pants and allowing the story world to develop however it needed to develop. Like I've said in the beginning and in the intro, I hope to be able to take the experience that I've had over the last 10 years writing that series and get even better at planning. And that's the thing about being a writer and a creator, is it's okay to trust your instincts. I think where people go wrong is when they say, well, I think I'm going to make more money if I write a 6-book series. So I'm going to take this little tiny kernel of an idea and it doesn't even excite me, but I'm going to make it into a 6-book series. And then you try to force it into something that it's not. Now, later in this video series, we are going to talk about the emotional toll of a series. So trust me, and please, please hear me when I tell you that it's not worth it to take on a long series just because you think you're going to make a lot of money writing it. It's an emotional process to dedicate so much of your life, especially if you are an emotional person like I am, an emotional creator. You really are going to pour so much of yourself into the writing of this series. You are going to become these characters in some ways. They're going to live inside your head and inside your heart for potentially decades to come. So make sure that whatever you're writing, you're not just forcing something onto the page to try to make money. And I know that there are people that will disagree with me and say, well, I'm writing for money and I don't care. And that's fine. You're not the person I'm talking to. The person that I'm talking to is someone who is writing because you love it. Please choose something that sparks imagination for you, that you think, I could live with this for a while, and then trust yourself that you're going to get it done and that it's going to be something fulfilling for you. The next question that I want to address that I get to ask all the time and that I ask myself, frankly, is how much of the series do you need to have planned before you start writing? This is a tough one because the more you can plan out, often the better, because you're going to be able to, especially when we get into talking about actually publishing this series, the more you have an idea of which characters you're going to be featuring and what story arc it is and how many books, the more you'll be able to plan out the marketing type packaging things, like how many covers am I going to need? How many titles am I going to have to brand just right? Or what's my publishing strategy going to be, and that sort of thing. Also, if you have a plan before you get started and you know how many books it's going to take for your character to defeat the big bad, then you can really go through and plan out all the little breadcrumbs, all the little twists and turns in the story, exactly where you want to put those clues in. And you can really, the same way that you plot your individual books, you could plot out those major points of realization and turning points and character change and plants and reveals. You could do all of that stuff so much stronger because you've planned out all 5 to 10 books or whatever it is ahead of time. However, it doesn't always work like this. And this is one of the main things I hope you take away from this whole series, but also from my channel in general, is that you are whoever you are, and you can get better as a writer. You will most certainly learn. The more you write, the more you publish, the more you will learn about how to be a great writer. But you also have to understand who you are fundamentally and what your own personal strengths and weaknesses are. Some people will be great at planning all of those things ahead. They will be able to write out every single detail. Like, I have a friend who writes romantic suspense, and she can tell you the backstory of the hero that's coming up 6 books from now. She knows the Navy SEALs in her team, and she knows everything about them, including who their father was and all of that sort of thing. And she has it all planned out so that when she's writing any little scene with that character 5 books before his book, before his feature book, she can already be planting in his personality and all these things that you need to know about him. It's a brilliant and beautiful thing to watch, and I wish I could be more like that. However, what I found personally is that if I plan too far ahead, too much minutia, too much detail, I was really kind of just wasting time and wasting energy, because what would inevitably happen in my personal writing experience and process is that when I sit down, for example, to write book 11 of this series, things will inevitably turn out differently than I expect. And this is just part of my personal writing experience. And I have a feeling some of you might relate to this as well. I cannot plan exactly where things are going, because part of the inspiration of my process is that the twists become revealed to me as I write. I can't pre-plan them. They're as much of a surprise to me as they are to the readers. And this is one of the reasons why my readers call me the queen of twists, because I have a lot of twists in my Shadow Demon saga that you don't see coming. Well, guess what? I never saw them coming either. And I think that if I try to manipulate them and plan them too far in advance, which I have tried many, many times, it always writes differently than I expect. My characters tend to have a mind of their own. I have tried many, many times to but this is how it's going to go. I'm going to try to write it exactly this way. But if it just doesn't flow on the paper, I have to just give it up and say, okay, Muse, you take over now. And it becomes this more mystical process. And I know that sounds crazy to some people, but it's almost as if the story exists outside of me and I'm just the one trying to discover it, find it. But I am not the one creating it because I cannot force that story to be whatever I wanted it to be. My friend who writes the romantic suspense, she doesn't force her story. She just sees them differently than I do. She can see them more clearly ahead of time and they just unfold the way that she wants to. She stays flexible if things change, but she very rarely has things come out of the blue that she has to replot. And so what I would find is if I would plot 4 or 5 books in advance, I would get to the first book in my plotting and the whole story would change. And because I'm writing a dynamic series where book 2 depends on what happened in book 1, the minute everything changes in book 1, that means every other book's like dominoes falling down. Every other book has to change. So then I would just have to go back through and replot all of those books. And it's just waste of months of time. So for me, what I have learned to do instead is I have a rough sketch of an idea of where these characters are going and what I think is going to happen. But I also have an emotional understanding of the fact that when I sit down to write book 10 or book 11 or whatever book I'm on, the story is going to change and I have to surrender to that and be okay with it. So when it comes to how much of your story do you need to have planned, this is going to be something that you need to discover for yourself. And I know this might not be the answer you wanted to hear, but what I would suggest for you is you take the workbook or you start a new notebook of your own and you start writing out your ideas and you say, okay, here's kind of the main story idea, the main series arc. How many books can I, write out these ideas? Or if you've got a detective mystery, how many mysteries could I imagine him solving? And then you just start sketching out those ideas and see what pops into your mind. If you are naturally someone who is going to get all the ideas and have everything planned out and your world is built and all the magic system is coming to you, then it will come and you will be able to write it all down and capture it and plan it out as much to your heart's content. If you sit down and nothing is coming to you, then maybe you're more like me and you just have to write it and get it on the page to discover it. The main thing you need to do, in my opinion, is just listen to yourself. Trust yourself. Don't try to force anything that isn't coming, but also don't get so obsessed with trying to make it perfect and trying to figure out every single detail that you never start writing, because procrastinating is a real thing and it's a real thing when it comes to your series as well. You could spend months, if not years, planning out your little town and your magic system. And this person owns the grocery store and this guy's the doctor and this girl lives next to him and all these things. You could have all of this plotted out and you could be thinking about characters' hair color and who's going to have babies together, or here's the magic system and here's the color of the dresses these women wear. But none of it's going to mean anything if you never actually sit down to write those books. So there's got to be a balance there. Listen to yourself, listen to your own intuition, have a way to capture the ideas as they come in, be it a notebook or a series Bible or some kind of brainstorming thing. It could be a Google Doc. However it is, have a way that you capture these notes and make sure you keep track of it, but stay flexible enough that you are allowed to change your mind if your series progresses in a way other than what you expected. How much you plan ahead also depends on the complexity of the series. So like I said, if you're writing short contemporary romances that are all based on a family, it might be easier to sort of plan things out because there's 6 brothers and sisters, so therefore there will be 6 books and you know exactly who this brother's going to get together with and this sister's going to get together with this guy. And once you have that sort of plotted out, then you can easily go in and you can start sketching out ideas for what's going to be the conflict. What are these people's personalities? What's their wound? You know, you can start going through those character sheets and figuring out that romance. Plus, romance has a specific type of structure to it usually. So maybe you can go through and begin to plan that. But if you're writing a fantasy world that's going to have 250,000 word books, and you know there's going to be 12 books in the series, and you're going across multiple dimensions and lots of different races of people and a very intricate magic system, then you're going to have a much more complex job when it comes to planning out your series than someone who's setting it in a contemporary world with a limited number of characters. So it's not good or bad either way. It's just one might be easier to plan ahead, whereas the other one is going to take more time. So just give it the time that it needs. And like I said, if you can't see all the details, don't let that stop you from getting started, because you might find that as you begin to write, some of these answers about the world itself and the types of characters and the story you're telling might come to you in the writing. So a similar question to this is, how much of your series should you have written before you start publishing? But we're not going to discuss that in this video because that is too long of a topic. If you're interested in that topic, however, I do have a video linked for you down below about should you rapid release, which does talk a little bit about publishing strategy. I also just happened to open up my Publish and Thrive course. It just opened up today and will be starting on August 10th. We cover a lot more of that publishing strategy in that course. So if you're interested in that kind of discussion, definitely check that out. So in terms of how much you have written before you start publishing, it's really going to be your decision. There is no one way that's best, because each way you decide to do it is going to have pros and cons. It's just what works best for you and what do you want to do. And if you think, well, maybe I kind of want to try it this way, then go for it. Try it. The best way to learn what works for you is to try different things. So don't hold yourself back or feel like you just need a crystal ball to figure it out, because spoiler alert, no crystal ball is going to appear before you and give you all the answers as to what's best for you. The only way you can learn what works for you is to try it and see. If you try it and it doesn't work for you, try it a different way. Now, the next set of questions that you'll need to answer and how you're going to actually plan out all of these things that go along with your story is something that I will guide you through in this workbook. So for the second half of this video, I am going to turn my camera down so you can actually see this workbook, and I'm going to walk you through some of the ways that I would suggest you plan and make these decisions about your series, and how you can use this workbook to plot out all those story threads, how you're going to figure out your entire series, and so on. And I will give you some examples of how I would do it with my own series. So let's move to the top-down view. Okay, you guys, so in this second part of the video, we're going to actually just kind of walk through the free How to Plan and Write Your Series workbook that I have available for newsletter subscribers. So make sure you go and sign up for my newsletter to get this for free. This is something that I put together to help kind of guide you through the entire planning process for your series. And as I was creating this, I already saw so many ways that I can make it better. So if you start using this yourself and you start to say, oh, you know what, I would love it if I had this type of page or this kind of reference, or if it asked these kinds of questions, please feel free to reach out and email me, because I am definitely interested in making this an even better resource. So consider this a first draft of the series workbook. Also, I realized as I was putting this on a white surface that you couldn't really see it very well, so I just threw down some tissue paper that I've been using in my book signings. So just ignore the way that looks. It's just a little bit of a backdrop to make it pop a little more. Okay, so the series workbook starts out basically with a message from me and then a questionnaire. And the questionnaire is really a way for you to start examining the decisions that you're going to make as you plan. Now, some of this, depending on where you are in the planning process, is just going to flow right out of you. And some of it you might think, oh my gosh, I don't even know yet. But my goal with this first part of the workbook is really to get you thinking along the right direction. So brainstorming, this is really about digging deep and saying, what type of series am I writing? What kind of characters am I going to have? What type of world is this? So hopefully these questions will get you on that path. So the first question is really just asking you, which type of series are you writing? A dynamic, a standalone, or an episodic? And if you aren't sure what those terms mean, head down to the link below and watch the first video in this series on these three types of series. Because when you identify what you're writing, that's going to really play into and influence a lot of the decisions that you make from here on out. Then I want you to take some time to journal and explain the type of series you want or plan to write and why you believe it fits into one of these categories. So for example, if you think yours is standalone, just do a little bit of journaling here about, I really want to write the type of series that readers can jump in on book 5 and still enjoy it. And I have this idea for a great detective that they're going to follow all the way through. So just something like that where you really explain why this is the type of series you want to write. Then I want you to, on the next page, list as many series as you can think of that have similar elements to yours or to what your idea is, or write out a bunch of series that inspire you in some way. So this doesn't even have to be your exact genre, but maybe it has elements that inspire you. And you can draw from books, film, television, you can draw from games that you've played or any other type of story or event. It could be YouTube channels, it could be anything, but just list as many things that you can think of. So you might say like, oh, I really loved playing Resident Evil. And so I kind of want to write something where there's this developed virus and you've got this one kind of badass character who is going to, follow through the whole series of trying to defeat this big organization. So you might write down what Resident Evil was and why it inspires you and why you think it's like yours. And just do that for as many things as you can think of. Then choose one of those things you listed and explain how it's similar to your idea and what elements inspire you the most about it. This is really just prompts to get you thinking about what type of series you're writing and why you're adding in the elements that you're adding in. Then in this next section, you're going to answer the question, what genre would you place your series into, or what subcategory within that genre, if applicable? For an example of this would be like, okay, your primary genre might be horror, but the subgenre or subcategory might be a haunted house horror or a monster horror or zombie horror or something like that. So it's really important to start to identify what genre you're going to be in. Now, there are some things like romantic suspense that might belong in a romance category as well as a suspense and thriller category, and that's fine, but you should be able to identify like one single primary genre that you would fit yourself into. And remember that like YA is not a genre, that's more of a category. So what genre within YA are you writing? YA paranormal, YA contemporary. So make sure that you drill down as closely as you can. And like I said, you don't have to have all of the answers figured out, but this should give you a good idea. Then does this genre and subcategory line up with the examples that you listed over here? So if you wrote a bunch of YA contemporary stuff over here, but this over here has a bunch of urban fantasy or fantasy, maybe ask yourself, like, if I'm so interested in fantasy, why am I writing a contemporary YA? So this might just give you a little bit more insight into what you really want to be writing. Then I have a little bit of a note down here for you that's basically saying that it's a balance. While it's always important to follow your heart and write stories that you love, it's also worthwhile to think about your intended audience before you start writing. So a lot of this that you've done in this early part of the workbook is really identifying reader expectations. What genre does this fit into, and what type of reader expectations are there within this genre? I also want you to be thinking about reader expectations to a degree as you continue to work through the workbook. Now, obviously, you want to write the story that you want to write, the story that's in your heart. So that's why I say it's a balance. You can't be writing it solely for a reader or an agent or a publishing house because you want to put a piece of yourself into it and you want to write the things that you're interested in. However, there are ways that stories are told time and time again. And if you're going to step outside of reader expectation, you need to be aware of how and why you're doing it. A lot of times when people are talking to me about their series, or I've been doing coaching with people, one of the main things or mistakes they make, I would say, when they start to really think and plan their series is they're like, I'm going to do something different than what anybody's ever done before. The first book's going to be a romance, but the second one's going to be a thriller, and the third one's going to be YA. And it's like, okay, those are all good ideas. But when you start thinking about a reader and the way stories are told, that is very non-traditional. And while non-traditional can work, you need to be aware before you do something that is so radical that it might not be something that really fits into the market. Especially if you're trying to sell this to a traditional publisher, you need to understand market trends. You need to understand at least the basics of simple things like if you're writing a small town romance, how are those stories normally told? What tense are they? How many points of view are there usually? And the more you can fall into what those like reader expectations are for your chosen genre, the more successful you're likely to be. I always say this with, take it with a grain of salt, because if you have an idea that's radical, but that you want to do it, I mean, think about George R. R. Martin and how much he revolutionized, fantasy with some of his Game of Thrones and the books in that Song of Ice and Fire series. You can break the rules, but it's always better, in my opinion, to break the rules because you are doing it on purpose and because then you can do it with skill rather than doing it with no skill. I don't know. I don't want to say it in a mean way, but just make sure you understand these things. So hopefully these questions get you moving in the right direction. And know that the further you deviate from what readers expect, what else has been done, like tell your story the way you want to tell it, or tell the story you want to tell. But the more you tell it in a different way or in a way that no one else has done before, the more you're taking a risk. I think that's the best way I can say it. So in the next section, you're looking at characters and points of view. So you're going to have many characters in your story, but what tense are you writing it and what type of point of view are you writing it? So how many point of view characters do you plan to have in your series? Like how many people are you going to be actually in their head telling from their point of view? Then will each book feature the same POV character or characters, or will each book be different? So with a small town romance or a paranormal romance, for example, you would usually have one couple per book, and you would usually, in a lot of instances, have the hero and the heroine, or the two different characters who are going to be falling in love, would be the POV characters. In young adult fantasy or most urban fantasy, you're typically just going to have that one main character who is the POV character throughout. But there, of course, are exceptions. And so you need to understand how you're doing it, what the norm is, how you're deviating from the norm, and start thinking about that. So how many POV characters do you have? And does each book feature the same POV character, or is every book different? And how will that POV work? Then what tense do you plan to write in? So the most obvious ones are like third person past tense, first person present tense, or first person past tense. And you need to think about that and understand what those tenses are, and then make the choice. If you guys want to see a video on how to choose the best tense for your story, please comment down below, like this video, and subscribe, and let me know, and I can put together a video on tense and POV as well. Because in my different series, I have written in just about everything. My Fairhope series is a new adult romance that's written in first person present tense. My Shadow Demon Saga is written with 4 POVs in first person past tense. And then my Eternal Sorrows series has 8 third person POVs. And sometimes you might be writing in a more omniscient point of view. So just understand the different points of view and how you're going to use them in your story. On this final page here of this section, I've given you a lot of room to list the main POV characters you know of so far, along with anything you already know about them. And you can list more than just the POV characters here. You can also list side characters if you have room and you want to start working through that. So you could list their appearance, their backstory, their characteristics, their personality, their family ties, how they fit into the story, all of those things you could go ahead and start filling out. And of course, you could print this multiple times if you want to write many different characters. The next section we have here is setting and world building. So in what time and place does the beginning of your series occur? And describe this place in detail. So are you working with a real world setting here where it's just set in contemporary, Italy or contemporary America, or a fictional small town, but that's basically based on reality? Or are you in a completely different fantasy world? Or maybe you're in an alternate version Chicago, or maybe you're setting your book in 1865 in England. You need to understand the where and the when. And then finally, what type of world is this? Real world, or are there speculative elements within our world, or are you just in a fantasy world? And this is where you're going to start figuring all of that out. So again, is this a real world setting, or are there fantasy, paranormal, or speculative elements? Explain. Will your story be primarily set in the same location throughout each book? So over here, I was asking about the beginning of your series. So will your story be set in the same location throughout each book, or are there multiple settings? List these locations and what you know about them so far. Now, this is not really a place to list, okay, they're in the bookshop and then they're in the house. It's more like, okay, they're in this town or this world or this village, and there's going to be a place later to list out the different like shops or locations they go to within that place. So this is more like on a bigger scale. You could even say this is the country they're in, and now I'm going to kind of break it down into cities. This would also be a place where you could say that your book might be taking place over multiple decades or in different centuries, or however you're going to put that together. Here is on the next page another little note about something to consider, is that I always find it helpful to sketch out a rough map of some of the main locations. So, you know, if you have a main street and you want to kind of sketch out what the different shops are there, and that they're going to turn left to get back to the house, so that you always are consistent and you have a clear picture in your mind of what the town looks like or what the country and the terrain looks like. Oh, there's, you know, especially if you're doing a fantasy series, there's mountains to the east and there's an ocean to the west, and you know, you can sketch all of that out. I actually also put a resource in the back because there are several places online where you can sketch out a map like online and on a website. So that's kind of cool as well. I know that there are several authors who, friends of mine, that have actually commissioned maps from artists that they put in their books, which I think is super cool. And I really want to do that too. So in this space below, consider listing out the locations like the stores, the neighborhoods, the terrains that you need to make room for in your map. So you can take out a blank sheet of paper and you can begin sketching that out. But here you can use this space to actually list the different places that you want to add to your map. Series arc. This is the next section. So as you think about your series, can you imagine several different storylines or conflicts that your characters will face over multiple books? Use the space below to brainstorm why you believe you have enough content for a series. So you could talk about how you're going to have a different mystery in each book and it's a standalone series. Or you could say, you know, this journey that my character is going to take them 3 years. So each book is going to be a year of their life. So kind of sketch out how that series arc is going to work here in this section. In terms of a series arc or tie-in, how will your novels be connected? Will you have that overarching storyline, or is there something else that will tie these books together? And explain. So if you go back to video number 2, if you haven't watched that yet in this series, I talk about the difference between character arcs, story arcs, and series arcs. So that's what we're talking about here. Will your series have an overarching storyline that takes place over the course of the whole series, or is there just a more loose tie-in that's like a relationship interconnection? Or is it going to be basically no overarching series arc and every book could stand alone, but it all has the same detective? So there's lots of options here, and this is just a place for you to start brainstorming that. How many books do you think you will need to tell this story? Or if you're writing a standalone series, how many books do you anticipate wanting to write? Or will you keep it open-ended so that you could just add more and more books? If you can, sketch out a rough idea of each conflict your characters will face, or each couple if you're writing a romance. So again, this is not like set in stone and you write this down and now it's permanent. This is just a place for you to start brainstorming. Okay, you know, I know they start this, you know, they start here when he ends up at this college, and I know we're going to take him through all 4 years of college, and then in the final year of college, he's finally going to meet the woman he loves. So I'm going to write 4 books, I think, and that's how long it's going to take. Or, okay, we've got this big villain that we need to face, but it's going to take my character several books to grow big enough or strong enough or to gather the skills and maturity to defeat this villain. So I think it's going to take them 6 books. And you're just kind of guessing at this point, but I want you to make an educated guess where you start to think through what are the possible storylines that I might follow here and how long do I think it's going to take? Or if you're writing romances, you might say, okay, I'm going to have a pack of werewolves. How many are going to be in this pack? And how many stories do I think I want to tell? So you can make those decisions ahead of time so that you can start writing those other characters into the early books so that readers get connected to those characters early on. Okay, so this next half of the planner is really your series planner. And this is where you're going to be kind of customizing your own sheets. So let me show you how it works. So the first part was the series questionnaire. And in this section, you're going to have a series or series arc planner, a books and story arc planner, a breadcrumbs or story threads tracker, characters, and a character arc planner, world building worksheet for a contemporary world, and a world building worksheet for a speculative or fantasy world. Again, keep in mind that you don't have to have all the answers yet. You can print these out, you can chicken scratch all over this, you can delete it, you can recycle it, you can do whatever you want to do, but this hopefully will get you thinking in the right direction. So we have a series overview page that's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to list your genre, your subcategory, your main POV characters, the tense that you're using. So these are all decisions you made in the questionnaire. And then I want you to list what elements are tying this series together. Is it all set in the same town? Is it set with the same family? Is it the same detective or a villain that is overarching? What is the glue that connects this series and makes it a series? So then you have a series arc sort of worksheet, and I've done 3 of these. So one is for a dynamic series, one is for a romance series, and one is for a mystery series. Obviously, there's only room for 2 books on each of these. So if you think you're going to have 6 books, you'll want to print this out 3 times, and you can really customize it in this way. So basically, I ask for your book title and your book number. On the dynamic series one, I'm asking what's the main story question. So what's the question that your reader is going to ask by the end of the first act? Like, will Harper fit in, or will she get sent to juvenile detention? Or who killed Tori Fairchild? Those are the types of main story questions that should be answered by the end of this one book. How does this book connect to the overarching series storyline? So with a dynamic series, you have to have that overarching storyline. So how does this book fit in with that? So you might say something like, this is the first book where Harper moves to Peachville. This is the one that sets it up, and she discovers that there are witches in this town. And that's the only part she knows about the overarching storyline. Other breadcrumbs are threads that are woven into this book. So these are just like story threads that your reader's not going to have the complete picture of yet, but they're going to get little clues, or you're going to be dropping breadcrumbs leading them down a path. So this is where you just sort of roughly sketch that out. So for example, in my book, Beautiful Demons, one of the breadcrumbs is that Harper discovers a picture of her mother, and she's pretty sure that her mother must have lived in this town. So I could put picture of her mother. Another breadcrumb could be that Jackson says that he's bound to an oath older than time. So what is this oath? What is he talking about? So those types of things, you can just add in what types of breadcrumbs or threads you think are going to be woven into this book. How does the main character grow in this particular book? And how does that relate to the overall series? And then the resolution. What's the resolution to this first book? And what's the lead in to the next book, if applicable? And you would fill this out, of course, the lead in thing. So you might say the resolution is she discovers who killed Tori, and she gets admitted onto the Demons cheerleading squad. And the lead in is that now there are all these mysteries as to what's going to happen once she gets invited into this inner circle of cheerleaders. So that's the lead into the next book. Obviously, when you get to the final book of the series, there won't be a lead in, but I've given you space for 2 books on each page. In the romance series one, we have the same type of setup, but it's conflict or plot overview. Who's the couple? Why do they resist each other? What's their conflict between each other? What they're each going to overcome. So like, what's their wound? What's their inner struggle? And then what's the resolution? Obviously, depending on the type of romance series and if it's darker or lighter or whatever it is, you might need to alter this a little bit for yourself, but hopefully this will give you an idea of how to structure that. For the mystery series, it's very similar. So what's the mystery? Who's the villain? Kind of who done it? What are the clues and twists that you're going to find in this book? And then what's the resolution? So if you have an overarching series arc in your mystery series, so maybe it's like an episodic mystery series, you would also, in the clues and twists or the resolution, you would want to put like, how does this book tie into the overarching series as well? I have a story arc worksheet for you here, which very briefly kind of walks you through just some of the main plot points. Obviously, if you want to go deeper into the plotting of each individual story arc or each individual book, you will go and get my How to Plot Your Novel workbook from the same resource library that you get when you sign up for my mailing list. And I have this much more detailed in terms of the actual plot. So you're going to kind of touch on plot here in the front. What's the book title and what's the book number? Who are the main characters? What's the inciting or key event? What's the first doorway? What's the midpoint? What's the black moment? And what's the resolution of the story? Then you're going to also ask yourself, how does this story's arc or action connect to the rest of the series? So if it's a romance, you might say, well, this story's action, this romance connects to the next book because the hero of this book is the brother of the hero of the next book. And you would put that in here. Explain how your characters grow in this book. So what's the character arc of these characters? And how does that relate to the next book? And then any other notes that you want to put in here. So is this going to be something that's fast paced? What other notes might you want to put in here about how this story connects, or what type of cliffhanger, or what type of new characters you're going to introduce in this book? And so this is per book. And what you would want to do is, if you have 7 books in your series, you would want to fill this out 7 different times. So just print it 7 times. I have a story threads sheet for you here as well. And this is one of the fun things I think about writing a series, especially one that's a dynamic series. So describe the story thread or related subplot. So this could be a subplot. This could also just be kind of small breadcrumbs, like an undercurrent running in the background that gets stronger with each one. It may not be a fully fledged subplot in books 1 and 2, but maybe by book 3, it becomes a subplot. And then maybe by book 4 and 5, it becomes the main plot. And it's just something that's been brewing throughout. So describe the story thread or related subplot. So what is it? So for example, I mentioned Harper's mother. So I'm going to say story thread is what really happened to Harper's mother. Then in the chart below, make notes about how this particular thread is carried through or mentioned in each book. So what breadcrumbs are you leaving behind? How is it mentioned? How does it affect the story? So I would write book number and I would write 1 here. And then in this space provided, I would write something like, the only thing Harper ever got from her mother, who she never met, was this necklace. And then I would mention how the necklace plays a role in this book, as well as she finds a photograph of her mother and someone mentions this photograph. So I would put that here as book 1. In book 2, how am I going to advance that part of the story? So what little piece of that thread am I going to weave through book 2? So the necklace becomes important yet again. We find out a little bit more about her mother, but we still don't have the answer as to what really happened to her mother. So we move to book 3 and we say, okay, this is where it really comes to a head, because this is where she finds out what really happened to her mother and where her mother is. And then in book 4, this, and in book 5, this. So you would just copy all those little threads. And like I said, you may not have all the answers here, but this will give you an opportunity to write out all those different story threads that you want to track and keep track of them, so you don't forget when you get to book 4 that, oh yeah, I need to weave that in, even if it's just a couple of mentions here and there. I've given you space to do 5 books on this sheet. So of course, if you have more than 5 books, you'll want to print it multiple times. And you will also want to print out this story thread sheet for each of your story threads. So this is not your main plot. This is going to be something that is like woven through until it becomes a bigger part of the story. So what happened to Harper's mother? Another one might be Jackson can see the future. What's going on with Jackson's images that he can draw, and how does that play into each book? So you might have, a dozen or half a dozen story threads that you're weaving through depending on the complexity of your series. So you'll want to print out one of these pages or multiple of these pages, depending on how many books and how many story threads you have. I also created a character arc sheet for you here, where you have similar things to what I put in your character arc on your How to Plot a Novel, but it goes a little different. So you've got name, a little bit of details and appearance notes. Then what is your character's wound or ghost? What do they believe? What's that lie they believe about themselves? And we talked about this in the previous video. At the beginning of the series, they are what? They are cynical. They believe they're not worth anything. They're in trouble with school. Where are they, both emotionally and physically, at the beginning of the series? By the end of the series, not just the end of this book, but by the end of the series, they have transformed to become what? Now, of course, if you're writing standalone romances, your character is going to actually transform within that book, not the whole series. So you want to kind of alter this for a romance that's a self-contained romance. But when you have a character arc that progresses over the course of multiple books, this will help you. So at the beginning of the series, they're like lost, they doubt themselves, they're not very strong, they've just started to realize they have powers. But by the end of the series, they're going to be super strong, they're going to have lots of friends, they're going to know their skills, they're going to be confident in themselves, whatever it is. What's the transformation? Then I have a little section here similar to the breadcrumbs where I've given you space for 5 books. And in the chart below, I want you to map out a brief explanation of what events in the storyline cause your character to grow and evolve, as well as notes on how they've changed. So like in book number 1, the catalyst or event might be that Harper goes to the town of Peachville and is welcomed onto the cheerleading squad. And her character growth here is that she finally believes for the first time in her life that someone cares about her. But she also knows that she's getting in with people that might not be good people. So she's desperate at the beginning to be loved and to fit in, but she's sort of getting in over her head, and she realizes this might not be where she really wants to be. Book 2, the catalyst or event, would be something else, and how does she grow from that? So you can explain that, and you might have multiple catalysts and points of growth throughout each book. But this gives you, again, space for 5 books, so if you need more, you can just print this out multiple times. I also have for you here a world building worksheet for a real world setting. So what's the main town or setting of this book? What type of place is this? And so this is, of course, you could do it per book or you could do it for the whole series, but what type of place is this? It is a small town, a big city, a factory town? Give me as many details as you can. List any important landmarks, terrain, special weather they have, special events they have. Anything you can think about this town or the culture of this place is good to list here. Then I've given you a lot of space here to also list the shops and buildings in the town and the characters who work there. So you might say the pharmacy, and here's Dr. Bob works there, and this, and this. And then you've also got the library, and here's who works there, and any kind of defining characteristics. Because especially if you're setting like a real world setting, obviously, you don't have to mark any businesses that your characters aren't going into or that aren't going to take place in your story, but anything you could see your characters interacting with, it's good to have a record of that. And we're going to talk about this more in the next video coming up on how to create a series Bible, but this is a good place to get started with it. Then you also have a spot here to list any other recurring characters in the town and their traits. So this is a great place to list any kind of quirky side characters or characters that might become future heroes and heroines or even the villain of your town. So this is good. So you could actually list a lot of them. You're probably going to list a lot of them in relation to the shops and buildings. So you can decide if you want to use this for more shops and buildings or if you want to just use this for characters that aren't necessarily tied to a location like a shop, but this is more like, okay, so-and-so's mother shows up in the story many times and that sort of thing. So additional notes on this story world. Again, I would also encourage you to sketch out a map of this location. Then I have a longer sort of journaling, brainstorming section here for a fantasy or speculative element world. So what's the main setting? What type of place is this? List any important landmarks. All of that is the same, but what do you know about the people who live in this place? Make notes on special creatures or races, their appearance, their history, their skills, their clothing, their language, and more. So this is where I feel like, oh my gosh, I could really do a lot more with this, but it's hard to get it all into one planner. So I've got a note for you on that in the back. So make notes on any special magic or technology found in this world. Be as specific as you can regarding how these things work, what are the rules that govern them, how do they appear when they're used, and what are any consequences to their use? Like, okay, you can use this wand in order to cast a spell, but every time you cast a spell, you get a little bit of a headache or you use up some of your stamina. What are the rules and the magic rules? Now, obviously, I'm not guiding you too closely here, but hopefully this will be a good jumping off point for thinking about the technology or how the magic works in your world. Notes on elements you will pull from true history, science, or technology, and how will you stay true to these, or how will you alter the truth or weave it into your fantasy? So even if you're in a separate world, you might be pulling things from the world we know now. You might be pulling some of your fantasy, the way the castles look or anything like that, from medieval England. So write out anything you're using. If you're writing an alternate history, what pieces of history are you changing and what are you keeping the same? This is a good place to brainstorm that. And then the final question is, what type of conflicts or challenges exist in this world? And are these pulled from our modern world? How do different creatures, races, or organizations interact with each other, and what rules or laws exist? So this is really where that government type stuff comes in. And this is really just the beginning to world building. So over here, I have a resource list for you as well. Okay, you guys, I know this was a longer video, but hopefully this is going to be super helpful for you in planning your own series. If you would like to see an example of how I fill out all of these sheets and you would like to see that more in detail, please let me know in the comments down below, because I can add an extra video on to the end of this how to write and plan your series showing you a little bit more how this would work in a practical sense as you're actually planning your series. You can also get a really good glimpse at how I put all of this information together in a series Bible in my next video. So make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, hit that notification bell so that you'll get notified whenever new videos come up from me, and make sure that you're following along and sign up for my newsletter list, not only so you can get the how to plan and write your series workbook, but tons of other free resources that I share throughout the year. I would love to have you as a part of that community. Also, if you are planning to self-publish, or you are already self-publishing and just aren't seeing the results you were hoping for, I would absolutely love for you to check out my Publish and Thrive course. This is a 5-week course that starts on August 10th, and it is truly a life-changing course. I have poured so much of my own personal knowledge into this class, and it's a resource that you'll be able to go back to, because I walk you through literally every step of the process, from choosing your keywords to exactly walkthroughs of how to upload your books to the different vendors, how to register your business name, how to keep track of your expenses and your sales numbers, through how to market your books and get them in front of readers, how to edit them. I cover so much ground in this course, and you can go back and have lifetime access and watch it over and over again as much as you need to. Plus, you get 2 hours of live Q&A time with me every week, as well as a private Facebook group that you will have lifetime access to. So come join our Publish and Thrive community. This class is not about how to take out $20,000 a month in ads and run a bunch of Facebook ads. This course is actually about how to create the writing career of your dreams and how to really thrive in this business, not just following trends and writing as fast as you can, but how to create a career that you will love and thrive in, that will fulfill you emotionally and financially for years to come. So if that sounds good to you and the content that I share here on Heart Breathings is meaningful to you, then I hope you'll check out that course as well. Registration will be open until we close the doors on August 10th on our very first start date for Module 1, and this course will not open again until at least February of 2021. So come join us. If you've also been interested in joining the HB90 course but haven't had a chance to do that yet, you can also check out my Thriving Author course bundle, where you'll be able to take the 5 weeks of Publish and Thrive followed by the full week-long HB90 course at a discount of $99. So you can check out all that information at the links down below. Thank you so much for being here. Please make sure to hit the thumbs up and comment on this video. That always helps YouTube recommend this to more authors like you. And thank you so much for being here. All right, you guys, I will see you in my next video, which will be coming up this Thursday. So I will see you then. All right, bye.